And so, I mean, this is kind of becoming a theme among our political class, where they're almost forcing these prosecutors into doing something in their cases because, Hunter Biden, the story of how this all happened is pretty bizarre in and of itself, right? This is 2018. He buys this gun while he's, using drugs, using crack cocaine, according to himself, right? And the woman that he's seeing at the time, who also happens to be his brother's widow, finds the gun, is afraid that he might use it on himself, apparently. And her solution to this was to throw it in a dumpster behind a grocery store, which I would think 99 times out of 100, that gun's probably just going to end up in a landfill and no one's going to even realize this happened.
Right.
But in this circumstance, somebody dug through that dumpster and then turned it over to the local police, which is another thing that would seem unusual, right?
Yes.
That somebody who's digging through a dumpster and finds a gun actually turns that gun into the cops. Another kind of surprising thing. Then there's a report from Politico where the store owner who sold this gun to Biden said that the Secret Service showed up and tried to take the background check form records for the sale, which he refused to turn over, rightfully so, because the Secret Service has no jurisdiction and wasn't even providing protection to Hunter Biden at the time. That's another weird twist. But then, this all comes out mainly because of the Secret Service thing. There wasn't a lot of attention paid to Hunter Biden having a gun until that happened. It became sort of a political scandal. And at that point, a few weeks later, Hunter Biden's autobiography came out.
Right. And
the thing is, initially, there wasn't a lot of, it's fairly difficult, from my understanding, at least from what Professor Stevenson says, that it's fairly difficult to prove somebody is addicted to a drug in this circumstance of when they go to buy a gun.
Right.
When they're talking about whether they lied on the background check to prove that they were addicted or that they were knowingly lying. And so you have to not just show that they've used drugs at some point in the past, but that is a continuing thing during the period where they purchased and owned the gun. And there wasn't evidence for that necessarily at the time in 28, when this first came out. I think it was actually 2021. And until Biden himself did a media tour for his book where he talked about how he was smoking crack every 15 minutes. That's a quote from the book, obviously probably somewhat of an exaggeration, but and it's at that point, it's harder to not do anything if you're the prosecutor looking into this case, right?
Yeah. So there are a couple of elements here. I mean, federal criminal prosecution only hits a tiny, tiny percentage of the cases it could. So getting charged with a federal crime is a little like getting struck by lightning. The feds have much more resources than the state does. They have the ability to do things really slowly. They have all these institutional advantages, and they spend those by only taking a relatively small number of cases and hoping that like the deterrence factor will help them out. But one of the ways that works out is that if you get noticed, you're more likely to get charged, and then you're kind of screwed because they tend to only move forward when they have a very strong case. So it's sort of like, blowing through a stop sign in front of a cop. Even if the cop doesn't typically pull people over for stop signs, if you blow the stop sign right in front of the cop, they're gonna say, I gotta pull you over. Right. Same thing with this. If you basically wave it in their face, they are going to think we just institutionally, we have to do something about this.
Yeah, that's kind of what it felt like when I was watching this unfold. It's like, well, he's out here saying he was addicted to drugs when he bought this gun while he's being investigated for that fact. And it's like, well, what are they supposed to do at that point?
One of the most constant themes, I'd say, of the last 10 or so years is this huge gulf between what is good politics and good PR and good marketing on the one hand, and what is good strategy for not going to prison on the other. And there's a big gulf between those two, and people have found it out to their regret.
And I think that you also touch on something that might explain some of the motivation or some of the inspiration for why people are still upset with this deal, even if the deal itself, based on the specific charges brought, might be fair or not absurd, at least. It's because there's all kinds of evidence of him using drugs and doing all sorts of untoward things. And he's got shady business dealings. He's got all these accusations against him. And most of that is not involved in this charging. And I think that also lends this air of, well, is this really fair? Is he getting special treatment because he's the president's son? And that's where I think it's hard to make up your mind exactly about, well, he might not have been charged with this at all if he wasn't Hunter Biden.
Right.
If he wasn't Hunter Biden, maybe he'd be charged with other things. It's hard to look at the totality of it and try to be fair-minded about the whole thing and not just picking a tribe or a partisan side when you examine this, right?
But let's look at that for a second, though. So, like, he's doing drugs all over the place, sometimes on video, but generally people only get hooked up and prosecuted for doing or having drugs when they're caught with them. The cops don't go and say, hey, I see this rap video. Let's go investigate whether that was real drugs in the video. That's just not something they do. You can have a YouTube channel where you're, doing whatever you want to do in terms of drugs, and no one's going to investigate you or charge you. I think the thing that people are really upset about is this concept that he's involved in some sort of, influence peddling and some sort of skeevy getting huge amounts of money because of his connection to his father, now the president. And the truth there is that I'm sure they looked at that, but influence peddling isn't inherently a federal crime. So if you don't have actual bribery, if you don't have other certain indicia of crime, saying, hey, put me on your board of directors, my dad is a senator or the president or whatever, is not a federal crime. It may be sleazy, but it's just not.
Yeah, and we don't need to get too deep into the whole Hunter Biden cinematic universe thing going on here. There's plenty of other people who are more informed about the details of all the different allegations. But I just wanted to speak a little bit to the general atmosphere of why people might look at this deal, and even if you can articulate why, based on what he was actually charged with, this isn't an insane sweetheart deal necessarily, people might not be satisfied by that.